HSV-1 versus HSV-2, what actually is the difference between them, if there is a difference? Because if you're anything like me, you've probably spent hours on Reddit trying to get the answer to this question, or you've talked to countless doctors who didn't even agree on the same answer. Well, in this video, I'm going to break down the actual difference between them, whether or not you can pass them without an outbreak, and can you actually cure them? Because after having herpes for 5 years, after interviewing a bunch of healthcare professionals who I do trust for information, and after coaching hundreds of clients to get their life back on track and date confidently, I want to make one video to just break down the truth and share it with you guys. Now, I want to first say that HSV-1 and HSV-2 are actually part of a larger family of viruses called Herpes viridae. Now, these are the viruses that infect human beings, and the crazy part is that by the time we die, at least 4 or 5 of these viruses are living permanently in our body, and we have no idea we have them. You know, things like VZV causes chickenpox and shingles, and most cases of mono are caused by Epstein-Barr virus. But yet, if you've never heard of any of these, and you're only familiar with these two, then the herpes stigma marketing campaign has done its job. So we're really going to focus on these two right now, but just from a larger idea, herpes is more than just HSV-2. Now, HSV-1 is actually incredibly old. Somewhere around 6 million years ago, it decided to come along. And I want to really touch on this first, even before we get to HSV-2, because if it wasn't for HSV-1, type 2 would never exist. So we always have the question of like, well, type 1 is oral herpes, right? That's cold sores, and type 2 is genital. But it's actually not that simple. Let's go back millions of years ago. HSV-1 is the OG herpes virus, okay? Now, HSV-1 is not an actual condition known as cold sores or oral herpes. It's simply a virus. And this virus, all along, could infect your mouth. Could also infect your genitals, and it never turns to type 2. HSV-1, as a virus, can actually infect anywhere on the body that basically just has an epithelial cell or a skin cell. It just prefers to have those mucosal membranes like your lips, your genitals, your butthole, your nose, places that allow it to easierly, we can't trust this guy, he doesn't know English, easierly infect the skin. Now, with that being said, a lot of people out there contract the virus, never have symptoms in their life, or maybe have symptoms that are mild, or symptoms when you're a kid and stuff. Because the vast majority of people get HSV-1 when they're younger. You know, maybe mommy kisses you as a kid, or grandma kisses you, and you typically get this on your mouth, or somewhere that is typically non-sexual. Now, with that being said though, maybe you're watching this video and you're like, well, I have it genitally. How is that possible? Well, all along, if you do not contract HSV-1 on your mouth, once you reach sexual maturity, you can then contract it either orally or genitally. Now, there's going to be some minute differences between the two, 1 and 2, genitally. However, to say that the stigma is any different for type 1 and type 2 genital would be a lie. People still feel a psychological impact. So you're probably asking yourself, well, then what is type 2? Well, type 2 is basically kind of like a cousin to type 1. I wouldn't say they're the same, but they're certainly not as different as society makes it out to be. So HSV-2 is basically somewhere between 1 and 2 million years old. And type 2 essentially adapted from type 1. Kind of like how COVID kept mutating from Omicron to Bumblebee to Megatron to all of these different viruses, versions of it to outcompete the last one. So HSV-2 is essentially a more effective version of genital herpes, which is why it primarily infects the genitals and is passed genital to genital, or sometimes genital to oral. But with this in mind, there's usually a sexual component to this. So that's why there is a large stigma around type 2. Now, back in the day before we had good testing in terms of genital swabs, people didn't really differentiate genital outbreaks as being either type 1 or type 2. They just assumed anything on the genitals was type 2, you're a slut, go home. Now, just like type 1, HSV-2 can infect anywhere on the body. The genitals, the mouth, can also infect anywhere. Just all it needs is some sort of skin cell or some sort of break in the skin to infect. But what actually happens when you get infected? Let's break it down simply. All right, so this is your skin, that's your spine. Essentially the virus, invisible, infects your skin cells here. It then travels into your nervous system, can either completely evade your immune system, and your immune system has no idea that you get it, or somewhere between 2 to 20 days after contracting it, for some people, myself included, could have quite a symptomatic outbreak, which is what happened to me. I had a large outbreak. And while your body can fight off this initial outbreak, the virus itself actually makes itself a home in your nervous system. At the base of your spine, in your sacral ganglia, just back here, you're going to have a genital infection of either type 1 or type 2. If you contract it orally, we'll just pretend this is someone's head up here. There is a nerve over here behind your jaw called the trigeminal ganglia, okay? And that is where an oral infection would lay dormant. So whether it's type 1 or type 2. And that's why people, when they have a HSV infection, it is location specific. So an oral infection only makes your mouth contagious and only causes symptoms orally. And a genital infection, whether type 1 or type 2, is only contagious from here and only causes symptoms there. Your type 1 never turns to type 2, type 2 never turns to type 1. If you get symptoms down there of type 1, you're not going to get cold sores. Okay, so the simplest way to explain it is that type 1 and type 2 are simply viruses. They don't dictate location, and they don't dictate where they're going to be contagious from or cause symptoms. It's just where you have it, what type do you have. Now, in terms of outbreaks and in terms of contagiousness, everyone is going to differ. And I want to break down, can you actually pass herpes without an outbreak? And how does the virus actually present itself? And the simplest way to do this is to put it into 3 different scenarios. So the 3 different scenarios is going to be outbreak, then we have asymptomatic shedding, and then we have dormancy, okay? Now, what this looks like is the noticeable herpes outbreak, when there is a lot of virus active on the skin. Could be a cold sore, could be a genital cold sore. I know, they're the same thing. We then have something called asymptomatic shedding, which is when there is literally no symptoms present that you notice, and there's a little bit of virus on the skin here. We then have dormancy, which is basically just no virus on the skin, not contagious. Virus is asleep. Now, the good news here is that when you have an outbreak, for those who are diagnosed properly, you can not get intimate. You can treat your outbreak. It's going to be a temporary thing that you can avoid. Because the risk of transmission is highest when you have an active outbreak, just hold off. The rest of the time, I'd say the majority of the time, the virus is dormant. You are not contagious. If you were to be intimate during these times, the risk of transmission is 0. But everyone's biggest fear is asymptomatic shedding. Now, what this simply means is that a little bit of the virus triggered by something, maybe it's stress, maybe it's just your time of the month, maybe it's your diet. A little bit of the virus can still travel out of your nervous system, travel up to your skin, and result in a chance of transmission. Now, are you ever going to pass the virus if you're asymptomatically shedding? Not necessarily, but you could, but not necessarily. So I do not want this to be everybody's biggest fear, because this is something that comes along with the virus and something that is arguably unavoidable as a human species. So we actually can't ignore the fact that this exists. We just have to live our life with this new information that, oh wait, herpes transmission is a risk. Even though we're all so deeply afraid of it, it's almost unavoidable. So how to actually process this versus this? You just assume every time you're going to be intimate that there's a small chance that this could be the case, but the majority of the time it's this. And it's important for this information to be passed to partners so they understand the risks of herpes. So every single time that anybody has ever gotten a cold sore, even when they don't have a cold sore present, is there a risk of transmission when they're intimate? Yes. Anybody who's ever had genital symptoms, is there a risk of transmission when there's no symptoms? Yes. This situation here exists for human beings, okay? And I think it's such a crazy thing to consider that by the time you become an adult and learn this information, it's like, oh my goodness, herpes is a risk then. It always has been a risk. It's just that we are so afraid of the topic of herpes, we never get properly educated about this. So how do you reduce the risk of transmission? Don't have sex during an outbreak. Don't kiss during a cold sore outbreak. You could take daily antivirals to decrease the risk of transmission by reducing the amount of virus that is shed. You can use protection if you want to decrease the amount of skin-to-skin contact. And if you take precautions and you're honest with your partner and you have a healthy lifestyle, you might never give anybody herpes despite the fact that you have it. And from my perspective, talking to hundreds of thousands of people probably about herpes, the vast majority of people are not getting herpes from someone who is like, hey, I have this, I'm taking precautions, I'm glad you know this. It's typically someone who doesn't know they have it, doesn't take precautions, doesn't care, doesn't even think that herpes could be very minimal. Because we always think that herpes is the worst thing ever. And let's say someone has like that. Obviously it would be in this spot, but they're like, oh, that can't be herpes, that's just an ingrown hair. Or I don't want to think that this potential symptom that comes every 1 or 2 years and stays for a week is herpes. Oh, I don't have herpes. I'm not the kind of person that would have herpes. That's why herpes goes unnoticed for a lot of us, and it's not included on STI panels, so it's very hard for anybody to accurately figure out their status unless they end up with the worst case scenario. Now, if you're watching this video and you feel kind of alone, like you're the only person with herpes, I want to break down exactly how prevalent HSV is, because considering both of them, having HSV-1 or 2 makes you normal. So we look at something like 66% of the global population under 50, weird way to do statistics, but okay, has HSV-1. Something like 13% has type 2. Now there's probably some crossover. Some people probably have both. So I would arguably say that somewhere around 70% of the world has HSV. So if you ever felt like you're the only person with herpes out there, you're not. You are part of the majority. And this statistic is one of the best ways to actually reframe your disclosure. So in a world where we're supposed to disclose this, or we're supposed to disclose genital HSV-1, for some reason, why is it not the same thing when it comes to oral HSV-1? Why isn't that every single person who's ever had a cold sore, regardless of their symptoms right now, why aren't they disclosing? Now, this is not to pick on anybody that has cold sores, but it's to say that if HSV-1 and HSV-2 were legally disclosed, or at least like it was a normal thing, then 70% of the world, or at least 50% of the world, would be disclosing herpes. So how is this actually going to help you? I want you to consider the fact that this should be happening. 70% of the world should be disclosing herpes if the world made sense. So when you go ahead and you have your disclosure and you're thinking about, oh no, they're going to judge me, or I'm the only person with herpes, or I don't want to have to do this, it feels so unfair. Think about the fact that if they react crazily, like, why are you telling me this? That's so gross. Look at them and say, have you never been disclosed to before? That's pretty crazy. You know, like most people have herpes. And this isn't some fake confidence. This isn't saying making up statistics. Literally, most people have herpes. And one of the most important things that I think gets completely overlooked is the fact that genital HSV-1, maybe you have it yourself, is a real thing. So we have a guy out there who's ever had a cold sore or something, or he doesn't even realize it's herpes. And he was to go down on a girl who doesn't have HSV at all. And she gets HSV-1 on her genitals. Society will now say, you're gross, you're a slut, you slept around, even if they were in a monogamous relationship. And they would say to him, oh, it's just a cold sore. And I think that if everybody simply knew this, we'd all start disclosing, or we would all have the fundamental knowledge to say that don't have sex during an outbreak. Should we even disclose HSV? It's inevitable when it comes to a risk. So to summarize this video, is there a difference between the two? Yes, but they're essentially cousins. They are two team members on the same team, and they are not location specific. Type 1 or type 2 could infect the mouth or the genitals. They have somewhat of a preferential location, although it's not even the right way to go about it, because it's just that type 1 is better adapted orally to cause more outbreaks and shed more. And type 2 is better adapted to have more outbreaks genitally and shed more genitally. Typically, if you have genital HSV-1, you may have one outbreak, you may have a few, but you're not going to have generally as many as HSV-2. And the same thing applies up here. People get cold sores like every few weeks or every few months or whenever the weather changes, but an oral infection of HSV-2, you may never know, or you may have like one outbreak, and then shedding is pretty minimal. Now, both of these are permanent viral infections of your nervous system. The virus basically is dormant for most of the time, goes to sleep. Your immune system can't identify the virus enough to actually cure you or fight it or rid your body of this. I'm sure you see online about all these different cures and scams and stuff, and you can do whatever you want to do. But in terms of my perspective, the viruses can't be fully eliminated from the body. And maybe you'll say, oh, you just got to believe it, bro. Well, when it comes to dating, when it comes to disclosure, even if I was hypothetically cured, I don't want to tell someone that and then risk giving them herpes. And then they ask me, I thought you were cured, and I have to deal with that situation. So, as far as I know, cannot be cured. You can do things to make it more dormant. You can do things to fluctuate your index value numbers, but an actual cure, I hope it comes one day. And in terms of can you pass it without an outbreak, the answer is yes, but will it ever happen if you're careful, if you take precautions, if you're mindful of your symptoms? Probably not. Now, with that being said, if this was a lot of information to absorb and you want me to dive deeper with you personally, whether it's on information or whether it's on getting back to dating confidently, I'm going to leave a link in the description box for my 3-step process video of how I help my coaching clients rid shame, make disclosure effortless, and attract a loving partner. I'll see you guys in the next video.